Hey guys, it's Monique here, and I'm back for another video. And today we're going to be talking about all things IRAC. So if you want to know more about IRAC and analyzing and strategizing, stay tuned. So the most important thing that you're taught in law school is how to IRAC. And IRAC is a mnemonic that's short for issue, rule, analysis, and conclusion. And IRAC is so important because that is the basis for your understanding of not only the material, but how to incorporate whatever rule of law that you're learning along with the facts, which is ultimately what you're going to be tested on once you get to the bar exam and you finish law school. So in order to IRAC anything, you have to be looking at some sort of comprehensive reading, whether that be a fact pattern that's created by one of your law professors or a case study from the book from one of your courses. That's generally where you gain material to IRAC in the first place. And so you read the fact pattern, you read the case study, or you read the written statement, and you try to figure out what the issue is. You try to figure out what the rule is, the analysis, and then the conclusion. You put that on paper, and ultimately you formulate basically your opinion as to why or why not someone should be held responsible for whatever the facts are in the case. Oftentimes you're able to figure out what the issue is by finding the rule of law. Now the rule of law is a little bit easier to find, especially if you are reading a case from the textbook, because it'll oftentimes just come out and say, the rule in this state is X, Y, and Z, or a legislation just passed XYZ law. So it'll tell you flat out what the rule is. And from the rule, you'll be able to narrow in on what that issue actually is. So once you get your issue down and you know what your rule is, you want to focus on the facts. That's the next place I would go. So you know what the issue is, you know what the rule of law is, move on to the facts. And of course, you can't do any of this until you've read the case. First things first is you got to read the case all the way through, no notes, no edits, nothing. Read it all the way through just for content purposes. You just want to comprehend what's going on. Then you go in a second time, sometimes a third time, and you go in trying to find the issue, the rule, the analysis, and you develop your own conclusion. But you want to read it through on its own, with making no edits, no notes, nothing. Just comprehend and take it all in. After you do that, try to find out what your issue is. If you're not able to find out the issue by reading it a second time, then go straight to that rule of law. Once you find the rule of law, you can narrow in on what the issue is. Now, you may not know the issue exactly from reading the rule of law. And if that's the case and you're still having issues figuring out what's really going on in this case, then you want to move on to the facts. That's going to help you. So a combination of the facts and the rule oftentimes will get you to where your issue is if you're having trouble spotting it. Because once you go to the facts, you'll find out what really is going on. You'll find out what the person or group of people did that warrants this case in the first place. And then you can ask yourself, okay, so what's the issue? Is the issue whether or not they can be held liable for X? Is the issue whether or not the state has the right to do Y? Like, you'll be able to figure that out most certainly from the facts. So just a little quick recap. Read the case all the way through. Number one, with no notes, no underlining, nothing. Just comprehend. Number two, go back a second time. And this is going to take a lot of time, guys, but this is the only way to really figure out what's going on, especially when you're new at this. Go back a second time. Figure out if you can find that issue. Because you're new, you probably won't have an easy time finding that issue right away. So go to the rule of law. The rule of law is very obvious a lot of times in these case books. It'll tell you the rule is this. Even if it doesn't tell you the rule is this, you'll see something that indicates in this state, a person is held responsible when they do X, Y, and Z. You'll see that. That'll be very clear. You'll have your rule of law. Then you go back to the facts and figure out exactly what happened. Because once you do that, you'll be able to understand what like I said, this person or these group of people or the state, whatever the case may be, is being held responsible for. You'll be able to figure out what that question is. Once you do, you move on to the analysis, and the analysis is the most difficult part of IRACing a case, IRACing a fact pattern, because that's the part where you really have to think. You really have to take those facts, and not all of the facts. You want to take the relevant facts, and you want to take that rule of law, and you want to combine or incorporate the two, and basically tell the reader, your law school professor, once you become an attorney, the judge, why you believe the court should or shouldn't rule a certain way, or the verdict should or shouldn't be X. And so that's so difficult because a lot of people don't know how to incorporate the two. It's not that they can't comprehend what the facts are and can't comprehend what the rule of law is. That's no problem. But it's taking the two and combining them and coming up with their own opinion, which is the hard part. Because essentially what you're doing is retelling the story, but in a more concise manner. You're retelling the story, but also including why a person should or should not be held responsible based on those facts and what the law says. So you always want to start off with, in this case, or here, or what we have at the case, in the case at hand. You always want to start off with that, and you go into what happened. You give a sentence about what the facts are. And then right after you give that sentence about what those facts are, you want to use that rule of law that connects with those facts. So, for example, hypothetically speaking, if there's a fact pattern or a case that you're reading that has this rule of law that states anybody that lives in this jurisdiction that takes something that is not theirs from somebody else with the intent to permanently deprive that other person from the item is responsible for whatever. And then you have facts wherein you see that an individual takes something from somebody else without their permission and does not bring that item back and has no intention on bringing that item back. And maybe there's facts that they move out of state or they stop answering their phone. You want to be able to use those facts that this person has moved out of state, they're no longer answering their phone, to establish that they took the item from somebody else with the intent to permanently deprive that person of the item based on X, Y, and Z. So a lot of times you can use any type of facts to really establish why or why not somebody should be held responsible for whatever it is they're doing, as long as you have the rule of law in there. So let's say that the case book provides you that rule of law that we just discussed, but there are absolutely no facts in that case that establish or that indicate that the individual took anything that wasn't theirs with the intent to permanently deprive somebody else of that item. Then you can say, here, we don't see X because the facts indicate Y. You know what I mean? So what I'm saying is it all depends on the rule of law. Now, yes, 9 times out of 10, you are going to see in the case book and in whatever fact pattern your professor gives you, circumstances where the facts line up with the rule of law. But that's not always the case. Either way, you have to make the argument, and that's where analysis comes in. And that's why I said it's the most important part, because that really shows the reader that you know what you're talking about. That really shows the reader that you're able to connect the two pieces. You want to show that you understand the rule of law and you understand the facts well enough to know that this person should not be responsible or this person should be responsible. And once you're able to do that, everything else will fall into place. And then after that, the conclusion is the easiest part. That's where you basically say, therefore, based on the above, in light of the same, this individual should be held responsible or should not be held responsible. Now, again, the question is going to be based off whatever your professor wants to ask you if we're talking about a fact pattern. If we're talking about briefing a case in a textbook and you're asked to IRAC the issues, then you really just want to give the rule, the analysis, the conclusion, and the rule of law. But really, it's the same concept in either scenario. You're dealing with the same thing, whether it be you reading a case book and practicing IRAC methods, or receiving a fact pattern from your professor for an exam you're taking and you're asked to IRAC. It's the same theory, it's the same concept. Really, the professor, the reader, the bar examiner really wants to see that you're able to figure out what the rule is. When you get to the bar exam, the rule is not going to just be highlighted for you. These are things you're just going to have to figure out yourself. So in some instances, IRACing from a case book is actually easier, and that's why in law school you're started off with that. That's supposed to be your practice. That's your basis. That's your starting point, because they give it to you. Once you get to that bar exam, they don't give it to you. You have to remember these rules of law. You're given a fact pattern that may have a number of issues in them, as many as 1 to whatever. And you got to figure out what all of those issues are based off what you've learned. And you got to be able to spot, oh, this rule is going to be implicated. Oh, this rule is going to be implicated because I see these facts here. So that's a little bit harder. And that's why they try to train you in law school by reading the case book where it gives it to you. But either way, like I said, it's the same concept, and you've got to be able to do it. You've got to be able to argue both sides. You've got to be able to anticipate what the other side's going to say, because it doesn't matter what your ultimate conclusion is if you're able to accurately analyze a fact pattern by using the correct rule of law and incorporating the facts to follow. It doesn't matter. But you also need to be able to anticipate or argue the other side. So you may say, in this case, so-and-so is not going to be implicated for the crime because of X, Y, and Z. Now, that may be good enough in law school, and sometimes it's okay on the bar. But in order to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room in the event that your grader or your law professor wants more, you want to be able to argue the other side and say, conversely, there is another argument that so-and-so is not responsible or is responsible. You want to be able to argue both sides, because that's really going to show that you understand what's going on. And ultimately, it's going to make you a better attorney. I know if you guys are in law school now, or if you're thinking about law school, the idea of IRAC can sound scary and just like a waste of time. I honestly saw it that way when I first started law school. It wasn't until I got to practice that I realized how important IRAC is. Even to this day, when I'm writing motions, I use the IRAC method. Like I implement that. My headings for each motion is the issue. And then I get into the rule of law. First paragraph, that's the rule of law. Second paragraph, sometimes the second paragraph even spills into the rule of law. And then I go straight into the analysis. I use my facts with whatever those rules are for whatever issue I'm arguing, I'm briefing. And so it really does follow you, and you really want to hone in on those skills now in law school. You want to get as good as you can at IRACing and figuring out what these issues are, because once you get to the bar exam, you're going to have to spot these issues on your own. Once you get to practice, you're going to have to spot these issues on your own, and you want to be able to do it with confidence because you learned how to do it in law school. You spent so much time figuring out in law school that you're able to spot these things with no problem. And I'm telling you guys, I'm telling you, it will make you a much better attorney if you're able to do that. And in a separate video, I can definitely share my screen and give some examples of how to IRAC and best practices. But in this video, I just really wanted to talk about it and kind of express the importance of IRACing and some of the little tips you can implement in becoming a good IRAC'er. So if you have any questions, of course, leave them down in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.